Hello and welcome back to Between the Covers, or shall I say, welcome to the first video episode. To be completely transparent with you, this is already my third attempt at filming this episode. On my first attempt, I did quite well, but then I got tired, so I kind of checked out after like 30 minutes of filming. And then I picked it up the next afternoon, which let's just take a moment to talk about how bad I am at this whole content creation thingy. Because I completely forgot that lighting is one of the most important aspect when you try to film a video. So I don't know what part of my brain decided to just close the curtain while filming. And so the footage came out like shit, and I didn't know that until the editing process. And that wasn't all. I then somehow decided to take up another week to just decide and go back and forth between whether to just use the footage anyway or to restart the whole process. And so here we are, 3 weeks later, I think, 2 or 3 weeks later, trying to like start the whole thing again. And so let's just hope that this time everything turned out okay. Because if not, I'm just gonna give up the video podcasting altogether because I'm just so tired at this point. This is like a one-woman show. Anyway, I think that it is time for me to introduce myself because not a lot of people know me. My name is Minh Anh. I'm from Vietnam. I'm currently living in Ho Chi Minh City. I'm 25 years old. I work in marketing communications and I do podcasts and writing part-time. And I started Between the Covers around a year ago, where I talked about every aspect of adulthood, from navigating friendships, relationships, loneliness, creativity, all that. I started this podcast just because I needed a place to yap. And I think I've learned by experience that your friends cannot be there for you 24/7 for listen to your bullshit. So might as well create like a little space for you to just yap and say whatever. Hopefully that my content will resonate or like can comfort any one of you out there. And so for the past year, I've put out 10 episodes, very trying. And yeah, mostly I just did audio and posted it on Spotify and Apple Podcast. And so here we are on our 10th episode. I feel like this could be a new chapter for us by challenging myself and putting myself out of comfort zone a little bit to perhaps try this video format, whatever. And so yeah, here we are. That was a very long intro, and we might as well get into the topic of this episode to not waste anyone's time, which is the lost art of asking questions. This has been the topic on my mind for quite a while, especially on occasions when I was on my way home after spending time with my friends, my close friends. And I think asking question is such a crucial but underrated effort in all kinds of relationships. It shows that you're curious about another person. And to me, it's also kind of one of the love languages that I really appreciated. And so, yeah, I would spend time with my friends. And of course, as any kind of catch up, we would just go on about our day, what's been the main theme in our life recently, and all is well and fine. These are the friends that I have known for ages, so it comes as no surprise that we kind of lose the habit of like asking each other kind of deep or like alternative questions that doesn't include in the category of like catching up. And this is not me critiquing my friends in any kind of way. They're very good friends. This is merely just a habit or like a tendency that I have picked up from the time that I have spent with people. And I just realized that I only know like a handful of people who are actually good at asking questions and showing curiosity to whomever they're speaking to. And I find it so nice when people actively engage in the conversation to not only add new perspective, but also nuance to the topic being discussed, which allows us not to only understand each other, but also incentivizes our curiosity. However, in reality, or at least my reality, that doesn't happen so often, especially within my close circles. I think we have lost the habit of asking good questions or like questions that stem from curiosity. Whereas with people we have just met, like a romantic prospect or like acquaintances, asking questions come more naturally because we only know them and novelty was still very much in that stage of the connection. Whereas with the folks that we have known forever and have shared history with, it seems like what we have known about them is kind of enough for us to like want to unpeel new layers, which I think is a little bit counterintuitive because I personally think that we as humans change all the time. Things happen to us every day, we experience things, and there's no guarantee that what we hold true about ourselves or about the world today will still hold true like a month from now. And so the point I'm trying to drive home is that there is so much substance in our inner world that we ourselves might not even know. And so I think that we no longer ask good questions, not because there's nothing left to know about our friends or family, but more so because there's a lack of desire to take interest, to take curiosity and to understand one another. I guess you have heard the saying, in order to be interesting, you have to be interested. I think of all the most interesting people that I've known, they are not the ones who kind of drop mind-blowing facts or like crack a joke or two every other sentences. They're actually the ones who have mastered the art of conversation and asking questions. And from my observations, these folks are the type of people who wouldn't necessarily make the conversation about themselves, but about the person in front of them. They really know how to ask questions and to show genuinely that they are interesting in who you are as a human being. I think we humans at the core are pretty self-centered, so it's not entirely surprising when we have someone interested in us and showing that they care about us. Hi, editing Mia here. So I just realized that at this point my brain must have been blacking out because I missed saying a keyword. What I meant was that humans are self-centered at the core, so it came as no surprise that we would feel flattered when someone takes interest in us. That was all that I'm trying to say, but somehow I just missed that word and made no sense of myself. And so, yeah, just want to clarify that. They just don't appear to be charming, but they are charming because they know how to the other person feel good about themselves by showing curiosity, by asking questions, and showing that they want to know you as a person. Anyway, I'm not citing this quote to suggest that we are boring or that becoming interesting is like the merit or like the end goal, because that's just sound a little bit pretentious. What it does is that it leads me to have this question. Why have we lost the desire to take interest? To zoom out a little, and if we have to zoom out, I think I have to put on my glasses because I cannot see. But to zoom a little, I think it has to do a lot with the way we consume information nowadays and how we deal with boredom on a larger scale. Have you noticed that our generation doesn't know how to be bored anymore? Like, we do everything to escape it. Recently, I was talking with a friend about my screen time and how alarming it has become. Like, we're talking about 8 hours per day here. We instinctively reach for our phones the minute we're not occupied with something. And I find it to happen the most when we're in the in-between moments, like when we have to wait for something, either for a person or like a train to catch, or like in a queue or like in an elevator. We always need something to pay attention to, and the internet and smartphones have made it even more convenient to do so. But that behavior hasn't always existed. Guys, it's Mia again here. Sorry for interrupting the video. I just want to apologize for the reflections of the ring light on my glasses. I know that from this point on it will be very distracting to look at me, so if you want to switch to the audio version, that is fine. But yeah, I just want to apologize. I found a Substack article called Why Boredom Might Be the Most Underrated Skill by Ayushi Thakur. I hope that I didn't butcher their name. Anyway, there's this paragraph that echoes exactly what I just said. The thing about boredom is that subs in places where we used to expect it. Car rides, long walks, the slow part of a meal when no one's talking. But now we've armored ourselves against it with screens, headphones, and endless micro distractions. The second boredom shows its face, we squat it away, which makes sense. Boredom feels uncomfortable, almost accusatory, like a reminder that you're wasting your limited hours. But I keep wondering if it's less of a waste and more of a hidden skill, the ability to tolerate emptiness long enough for something to surface. Back to the conversation with my friend. She asked me such a valid question, which is that back then when we were bored, what did we do? Especially when we had to wait for our parents to pick us up from school. And it's true that back in the day, there wasn't much to do other than observing our surroundings and watching the world goes by. And it's crazy to think how drastically life has changed in the past 10 to 12 years and how much our behaviors have been conditioned as a result. Back in the day, I was a child and didn't have access to the kind of technology that I do now. So there was no such thing as TikTok or like Instagram reels to pass the time with. But when we were forced into boredom, we are also forced to observe. And I think that from observation comes curiosity. If we would just watch our surroundings and our brains by reflex just come up with random questions like, why are those people arguing? Or like, we spot a bridge being built and then we would ask, why are they building that bridge? Or like, why is that man walking barefoot? And perhaps these questions seem meaningless in the grander scheme of things, but they are the small sparks that form a habit of like asking questions, of like paying attention, developing curiosity, and actively engaging with life. And I think boredom is easily one of the most misunderstood emotions. If you think about it, emotions are kind of like the signs for hidden facts. For example, anger kind of let you know which of the boundaries you have are being stepped on. Like regret lets you know that what is important to you, but you have been neglecting. So I think boredom must have something to do with like curiosity or like the lack thereof. And around the same time when I was doing research for this episode, I found an article called We're Not Bored Anymore and We Should Be by Substacks by Elle. I think that's her newsletter's name, in which she said that boredom is seen more as a void and a black hole in our lives instead of a blank canvas that can transform into something new and something creative. In a complete vacuum of distractions and outside noise, we are able to think in depth, create more freely, and form clear opinions of our own. Our attention spans are shrinking as we use the instant gratification of social media and short form content as a quick fix to the few initial discomforting moments of being bored. That was a long sentence. Boredom is as important for our personhood as much as any other emotion, but we have become afraid of silence and only hearing our thoughts. And I find it both funny and sad that the line between the digital world and the real one has becoming so blurry that we have forgotten how to exist without gluing our eyes to the screen or like blasting our ears with music or podcasts. And I know it's a bit ironic that I'm saying this because I myself am doing podcasts, but yeah, I could go on and on about this topic because it's so nuanced, but it's undeniable that the lack of space for boredom, coupled with our constant overexposure and overconsumption of information, has changed the way we process things, which I think to some extent shows up in the way that we communicate face to face. Active listening And engaging in real conversation has already become a rare skill, one that requires your full presence and a genuine attempt to understand. And the passive consumption of social media and short form content definitely doesn't help either. And asking questions from a place of curiosity, I think, is such an underrated form of intimacy. Like, it requires you to piece together all of the information, both the old and the new, the obvious and the obscure, to kind of spot a gap of knowledge, to identify a contrast that doesn't sit so right, or even just let yourself discover a new territory that you have never been to, like an aspect of a person that you haven't known until then. From there, you can verify or hypothesize or like demand for further elaboration. And the means to an end is just to understand one another and get to know your person on a deeper level. And this very thought kind of remind me about this movie called Before Sunrise. If you have followed my podcast, you know that is the movie or like the trilogy that I quote from a lot. But yeah, I remember Celine, the female protagonist, was saying something to Jesse about everything we do in life is to kind of get closer and to be understood by one another a little bit more. I think I have to put on my glasses. If there's any kind of magic in this world, it must be in the attempt of understanding someone, sharing something. I know it's almost impossible to succeed, but who cares really? The answer must be in the attempt. And I think that that is so true and so idealistic as well. But it's not entirely about understanding others. Sometimes it's one of the easiest routes to understanding yourself. Personally, I've learned more about myself and about life through talking to people and asking questions rather than reading. And I say that as a rather avid reader myself. But I think it's called relational approach to learning, although I'm not quite sure, and don't quote me on that. But anyway, the reason that we can learn about ourselves by talking to people is, and I think this is where introspection can really play a vital role. Like us, they are, whoever it is in front of us, is presenting their perspective. We in our brains are already forming an opinion whether we agree or disagree, and whether we're having a gap of knowledge or like vice versa, in which we have more insights than the persons who are talking. It's more or less like a process of self-actualization in process, if we think about it. And I just realized that I was talking in total nonsense. Let's just cut this part. Anyway, from another perspective, it might be too pessimistic to assume that we all no longer ask good questions because we have like the desire to take interest. I'm sure beyond like the lack of interest, there are countless other factors at play. In light of this episode, I also asked my friends' opinions on the reason why we no longer ask interesting questions. And one of them made a point that I find quite interesting, which is that each conversation usually has a main recipient. And the main recipient is usually the one out of the two or any number of people involved has more dire need to be heard, regulated, and balanced. And if they're unregulated and their headspace is occupied, there's less chance that they will be prompted to ask questions, or at least not until they're done offloading the stressors. So when I heard that, I thought to myself, if stress is like the killer of connection. And I'm sure there's already quite a few research that tries to understand this hypothesis. But from my own perspective, I think that stress has this terminal uniqueness. It's not a good joke, but I just feel like this is like a more appropriate setting to use the term terminal uniqueness than a song about the archetype of the eldest daughter. Anyway, I digress. Stress has this ability to consume us and colonize our headspace. When we're under pressure, whether it's something at work, a conflict within the family, or that someone randomly said to you that just weigh on your self-esteem. Like our minds can easily slip into a repetitive loop of rumination. We just cannot stop thinking about it. And I'm not excluded from this either. On a podcast episode with Louis House, relationship expert Gillian Tuckery talks about how stress can be one of the three major killers of relationship. And she was referring to romantic relationships, but I think her point applies to all types of relationship. It's that consistent feeling of being off, stressed, overwhelmed, and not doing anything about it. Stress changes the way we see things. It changes our biology, and that inevitably causes rupture in communication and connection. When we're stressed, it's difficult to be present and genuinely engage with the person in front of us. They could be excitedly telling you something good that happened to them during the day, hoping for your reaction or a question that shows that you care to understand them better. Meanwhile, from your perspective, their voice kind of just bob in one ear and out the other just because something else has been weighing on your mind. Maybe you're stuck replaying on earlier scenario in your head, and no matter how hard you try, you can just not seem to switch off. So understandably, your friend's story about her boyfriend surprising her with flowers isn't exactly what will put out the fire for you. And I think that is exactly why people tend to connect better when we're on vacation. Traveling forces us to carve out space solely for discovery, relaxation, and connection. We make it our intention to spend that time frame meaningfully, knowing that stress will reclaim our space the second the plane lands. And there's a Substack article called The Archaeology of Intimacy by The Science of Being that dove right into the intimacy of curiosity. And I really love this part of the essay. To love someone is to be curious about the sentiment of their being, to kneel in the dirt of another person's reality and be willing to dig. It is not just about the surface, not just about what is easier to admire, but about the way they exist in the world, the tiny and often messy mechanisms that make them who they are. And I don't know if I'm being idealistic, but I find it's such a beautiful act to carry that same intention into our everyday conversations. Like, not every chat needs to turn into this deep philosophical exchange, but instead of listening to someone as passively as we would scroll on a TikTok video, like, how meaningful would it be if we saved a little space to be curious about our loved ones, about a friend, a partner, or family member, simply because we choose to care? For most part of this episode, we have explored asking questions as a form of intimacy and how our generation seems to be losing that very art to overstimulation and the passive consumption of media. However, in all fairness, I think there's another often overlooked form of intimacy, one that sits on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is the language of silence. The previous Substack article that I quote from, Why Boredom Might Be the Most Underrated Skill, also touched on boredom as an intimacy skill. Think about the people you're closest to. Can you sit with them in silence without scrambling to fill it? Can you go on a walk together without checking your phones, letting conversations meander and stall? The best relationships, friendships, partnerships, even family ties are the ones that can hold boredom without panic. If you can survive the dual moments together, you can survive almost anything. I think it takes a certain level of closeness to be completely still in another human being's presence, like completely silent. I can recall countless instances where I had to be the one who carried the conversation, asking questions not out of curiosity, but kind of like a desperate attempt to delay the dreadful silence that follows when words run out. Yet I can also name the people with whom I feel completely at ease in silence with, where like silence almost feel natural. And those who I can just watch people with in silence or just sit on FaceTime doing my makeup without needing to say a single word. There's a moment in every deep connection when words become unnecessary. Not because there's nothing to say, but because everything that needs to be said already existed between you. And it's the kind of silence that isn't empty, but filled with substances and history that you have shared with each other. It's like observing the same event and knowing exactly what's on the other person's mind with just a glance. Or sometimes it's the silence arrives as the night winds down, the empty space we intentionally leave for the residual emotion of the evening to just have a breath, just to exist in the space. But to arrive at this stage where silence become more like a relief than a torment, I think it still requires the excavation stage. In the previous Substack article, The Archaeology of Intimacy, Lena, the author, had this paragraph that she wrote beautifully about curiosity and excavating another person being as a form of intimacy. But the sign to let go is not when the spark dims or when the slick slows or when the schedule clash. The marker is when someone no longer wants to excavate, when they abandon curiosity. We never stop layering. We are never finished side. Sometimes the digging will pause for work, for stress, for mental health, but the person leaves the tools at the edge, ready to pick them up again. That pause is not the end. The end is when the tools are abandoned altogether. And the last part really got me thinking about how this tend to happen with the familiar faces in our life, the people that are closest to us, friends, family, spouses. The loss of curiosity becomes the beginning of drifting apart when we meet a friend over a cup of coffee and the conversation kind of ends the moment they're done telling about their day, or the kind of low maintenance effort to keep in touch by a streak of sending each other reels. I mean, I send reels to my friends all the time, so I'm not saying this to accuse anyone of doing so, but I just find it interesting the way we interact with our friends in this age of social media, how it has created this faux or like artificial feeling of staying close just by the frequency of our online interaction. And all at the same time, our friends could be very much going through something that we have no idea about because we don't have the curiosity to ask, or like we don't proactively reach out, or they themselves are afraid to bother us. And I also find it interesting how we define what a good friend is nowadays. In the Western online discourse, there has been the saying, in order to have a village, you have to become a villager, or like something along that line. The way friendship or good relationships in general went about in the past had been a reciprocal act of service. People would pick each other up at the airports, help each other move houses, or like babysit their kids. Some even spend time with their friends' family. I remember that I used to do that in my high school day as well. It's ironic how the way that the modern world works goes in the completely opposite direction. It makes us look as act of service is like burden or like a favor. We are now paying for things that we could have easily asked a friend to help us to do. Like, why would you ask a friend to pick you up from the airport where transport app like Grab or Uber exist? Why would you rely on your friends emotionally when you already have your therapist? I don't know. I don't know how it goes in other cultures and countries. You guys can tell me about it in the comments. But where I live, it has kind of become a norm to just see your friends in a one-dimensional setting, like over a cup of coffee or like a cocktail. You don't know much about your friend beyond what they choose to tell you. Hence, I'm a big believer in the importance of taking curiosity in each other. Simon Sinek has a different perspective on this, though, one that is related to active service. For anyone doesn't follow Simon Sinek, he's a leadership expert and best-selling authors of books Start With Why, Find Your Why, Leader Eats Last, etc. He's also a regular guest on the Diary of CEO podcast, and on this particular episode about friendship, there's one part of the conversation where he emphasized on active service in friendships. The true skill that we've lost is service. We have overemphasized taking over giving. We've overemphasized selfish over selfless. Friendship is fundamentally service. And if you don't know the skill of service, then you probably don't know how to be a friend, let alone make a friend. I think you have to learn to be a friend before you can make a friend, because people only want to be your friend if you know how to be there. And It's funny how my view on friendship has changed over the past few years. I think 5 years ago, a good friendship to me is like a relationship where I can deep talk with my friend. But as I grow older and meet more people, I realize that we can have different kinds of friendship. But one important aspect that I think still holds true to me, which is that friendship has to be additive. Like you can feel like they are adding some value to your life and vice versa, which is pretty much resonating with Simon Sinek mindset. I think that friendship is kind of relationship where you build each other up and help each other become a better person in one way or another, whether by offering emotional support or like offering companion or giving a very practical advice. There's different forms of how to be a good friend, but it's definitely how to be backed by the intention of service, I guess. I don't know. I'm talking nonsense by now because I don't know how to close out this episode. But anyway, I think that with this episode, I just think how great would it be if we bring back the art of asking good questions, to take a moment to slow down and make space for one another and to take interest in one another, because everything is so fast paced right now, and our attention span is getting shorter and shorter, and we keep blaming the digital world for it without actually making efforts to building what is real. That sounds preachy. The modern world has presented us with so much convenience and all of the amazing things that we can experience. I think humans, the way human exist and thrive on, is still connection, and real connection requires presence. Oh my god, that sounds so profound. Anyway, that is all for this episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is quite a long episode actually. Don't forget to subscribe, follow Between the Covers on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. I'm excited for what's ahead, even though I'm not sure about my consistency in like posting, but I'll try my best. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next episode on Between the Covers.